part 2, we're going to use the 2D shapes we created in part 1 as the basis for the 3D model of the table. Before we begin modeling, let's switch to front view. And everything disappeared. That, of course, is because it's all in 3D now, and looking at the front of a line, you see basically nothing. Fortunately, this is easy. We're going to switch to left view, select everything, modify rotate right, and then back to front view, and voila, it's back. If we happen to go back to top view now, we'll see that we're only seeing a line in this view. We could have started the project from front to begin with, but because TopPlan is specifically designed for 2D drafting, it has some special behaviors which make 2D drafting easier than in any of the other views. And as you just saw, it's really easy to rotate 2D drafting into any view you need. So I highly recommend starting projects in TopPlan and then rotating them as necessary. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping and move my 2D drawing out of the way a bit. Let's put it there. We're going to start with the hardest part, the center pedestal. We need half a pedestal to sweep. Fortunately, I kept half the pedestal from the creation of the 2D pedestal. However, if I hadn't, it would be really easy to grab the entire pedestal and use clip surface to cut it in half. So I'm going to sweep it using the sweep command. With all the defaults to sweep the center column. And the first thing I discover is that because that half a column wasn't solid, this looks a little strange. So if I make it solid now, it looks better. So this looks close to the center column, but you'll notice that whereas the center of it is correct, we don't have the octagonal parts on the top and the bottom because you can't really sweep an octagon. So in order to create the octagonal parts, we're going to need to take our rounded parts and slice away some edges to flatten 8 sides on the top and the bottom of the column. So in order to do that, I'm going to switch to top view, or TopPlan, either one works, and use the regular polygon tool in inscribed mode, set to 8 sides, and then I'm going to click in the center and draw an octagon right to the edge of the center column. Then I'm going to use the circle tool in radius mode using the same center point, and I'm going to draw a circle that's larger than the octagon. It doesn't really make any difference how much larger, it just needs to be larger. And then I'm going to send it backward, not to back, but backward so that it's behind the octagon. I'm going to select the octagon and the circle together and use modify clip surface and then hit delete to create this shape. Let me just make it a color so you can see what's going on. Then I'm going to extrude this shape 12 inches. I'm going to go to an isometric view and just duplicate this so you can see what's going on. So basically what I've done is I've created a socket wrench. It looks a little strange right here because I believe I have OpenGL in a low quality setting. I'm going to then look at the OpenGL settings and move everything to medium, which helps me understand what's going on a little better. So I've created this socket wrench. So what I'm going to do is go to front view and wireframe and duplicate my socket wrench. and set it so that it starts at the bottom of the curve of the top part of the pedestal, and then at the bottom I'm going to start it at the top of that curve. So let me go to isometric and back to OpenGL so you can see what's going on. So hopefully that makes sense, that I've put this sleeve over the center column, leaving the part in the center that's supposed to be rounded left out. Then I'm going to select all three items and do Model Subtract Solids. Subtract Solids is the 3D version of Clip Surface. Clip Surface only works on 2D objects. Subtract Solids only works on 3D objects. Subtract Solids, and then it's going to ask you to highlight the object being subtracted from. So you can click through the objects using the arrows here, and it highlights them in red. You want the object that's going to be left to be highlighted or highlighted. So I want this part to be left. I want to subtract the red from the white. So I have that selected properly. I'm going to click OK, and you'll see what happens is it has subtracted the octagonal socket wrench shape, leaving me with a top and a bottom that are sliced off in an octagonal manner. So now this looks like it's supposed to. It's got a rounded center section and an octagonal top and bottom. The Boolean functions, which is what these four functions are, adding solids, subtracting solids, intersecting solids, and sectioning solids, allow you to take multiple 3D objects and group them together, or subtract them from each other, or add them together, or intersect them to create much more complicated shapes than you could create with any of the individual tools. Next, we're going to model the tabletop, and I'm going to do that in two different ways in order to demonstrate a couple of different workflows and a couple of new tools. So the first way is going to be to simply sweep it using the shapes we've already drawn. So I'm going to duplicate these, move them over, and I need to cut these in half in order to sweep them. Before I do that, I can eliminate this line. I don't need that. And I'm going to draw a line in the center. The reason this line appears behind is because this is one of the quirks of drafting 2D elements in views other than top plan, which is why I was saying earlier it's easier to draft 2D things in top plan. So I'm going to select all the three of these elements, modify Clip Surface, which cuts them in half, and then I can simply select them both and sweep. And then place this on top. We go to top view. It's automatically centered just because when I use this sweep command, it sweeps everything in the same plane. So the plane that the pedestal was originally swept in, since I didn't move the pedestal since then, is where the tabletop is also swept. So that's one way of doing it. This works great if it happens to be round, but if you happen to have any other shape table, an octagonal table or a square table, you couldn't really sweep it. So that's why I'm going to demonstrate another way. The other way is using extrusion. So I'm going to go to top, or in this case actually top plan will be somewhat easier. I'm going to use the circle tool to draw a circle that's the diameter of the table, which was 3 feet 4. And then I need to draw a circle that's the diameter of the apron, which is 3 feet 2, so I could just do the same thing again. Or I can use the offset tool and set it to 1 inch. And the way the offset tool works is, if I click inside the circle, it will draw a circle that's 1 inch, or whatever the shape is, that's 1 inch smaller. Or if I click outside the shape, it'll draw a duplicate shape that's 1 inch bigger. So I'm going to click inside, and it draws the circle that's 1 inch smaller. Then I can extrude that 2.5 inches to be the apron, and I can extrude the tabletop itself 1 inch. And we switch to front, and I can move these into place. And then I need to find a way to deal with this cove route that is around the table edge. So what I need, there is no routing tool in Vectorworks. So what I'm going to do is create a positive shape of basically a hula hoop shape, and then use subtract solids again to subtract that shape from the top, which will have the same effect of routing it. So what I need to do is, to create this hula hoop shape, is I need to duplicate the circle that's the top. And if I try to just draw a circle, it draws it on the ground plane because it's a 2D shape. I could do that and move it, sort of, although that's somewhat complicated. So what I'm going to do here is use the extract tool. So if I go to the 3D modeling tools and use the extract tool and set it to extract curve mode, if I click on any curve or a series of curves, if I had more than one curve I can hold down shift, but I select any curve and then tell it OK, it will extract that curve as its own separate element that's separate from the tabletop. Then I'm going to draw a circle that has a diameter of 1.5. If you remember, our radius of our route was 0.75, so the diameter of the circle is going to be 1.5. Then I need to select the circle and also the curve that I just drew. I'm going to have a really hard time selecting this curve because when I hover over the table, it's going to want to select the tabletop itself, not this infinitely small curve. So the easiest way to select it is to switch to front view and drag over it, not the entire tabletop, but just the top of it, and that selects the curve for me. Then I can hold down shift and select both the circle, the curve, and also the new circle that I just drew. Now, a new tool, model extrude along path. What extrude along path does is take a shape and extrude it along another shape. So extrude along path, click there. It will ask you to select the path object. Once again, this is like subtraction. It will highlight objects in red, and you want the one in red to be the path, not the shape. Then click OK, and you'll see that it's taken that circle and has extruded it along the path of the circle. I'm going to switch to front view so you can see what's going on. So then I can take my new hula hoop and my original tabletop and use the model subtract solids function, specifying that I want the tabletop to be the object to be subtracted from, and click OK, and there's my route. So, like I said, this seems far more complicated in this particular case than just sweeping, but if I had any shape table that other than round, I wouldn't be able to sweep it. I'd have to come up with another method, so I wanted you to be aware of this method. I also think that when we get into applying the wood texture later, we're going to discover that the texture applies differently to the swept object than it does to the extruded object. So I'm going to keep this off to the side so we can look at that later. Okay, next we're going to work on the table legs. So we already have the shape, so it seems like a fairly straightforward extrusion. We need to figure out what the extrusion depth is going to be. So I'm going to use my tape measure and measure maybe 1.5 inches, although we're in perspective, so we'll see what happens. So I'm going to duplicate my table leg. I'm going to extrude it 1.5 inches. I'm going to look at that in isometric, and depending on which one of these I look at, it looks like it's probably similar to this one, but it might not be as thick as that one. I'm not sure. It looks a little skinny to me. So I'm going to go ahead and change it to 2 inches. And the nice thing about extrusion is if you discover that your extrusion isn't right, all you have to do is go to Object Info and type a new number, and it works very easily. So I think we're going to discover that 2 inches looks better than 1 inch. Okay, so back to front. Then I need to line my leg up with my table. So I'm going to draw a line and move it down 29 inches the same way I look at still set from the 2D drawing, the same way I did for the 2D drawing. So that's going to establish the bottom of the table. So that if I put the leg there, oh, something is funky. Aha! Remember, I drew the column to go all the way to the bottom of the top of the table, so it's behind the skirt. So if I put that in the right place and then move that again, that's better. Okay, so if I put that there and then line this up here, okay. Except that if I look at my photograph and I look at my column, I discover that the leg should attach to one of the flat sides of the center pedestal, and if I go to the top, I discover I really have this going on. So I could rotate the leg, but the easiest way to deal with this really is to rotate the center pedestal. So I'm going to use the rotate tool in the center. I'm going to go to the center of one of the sides, hold down Shift, and rotate it so that it's flat, and then I can take the leg and line it up with the flat side like that. And if we go back to front, and now we're all lined up. Okay, so that's looking better. Isometric, that's looking pretty good. If I look closely at the picture of the leg in the model, I discover that the edges have been eased. They've been slightly rounded. So just in order to make this look a little more realistic, I want to slightly round the edges of my leg. So in order to do that, new tool, we're going to, in the 3D modeling tools, we're going to use the fillet edge tool. And the way that works is you select edges and give it a radius, and it will do a round over for you, basically. So I'm going to select this edge, this edge, this edge, this edge, this edge, this edge, and then click here, and that looks pretty good. Then I'm going to rotate around and do the other side. So back to fillet. Hold down Shift, select all 6, and click OK. You should be aware that the fillet tool, in its settings, preferences, will allow you to select all faces or to select all edges. And the reason I didn't do that is because I did not want to fillet this edge or this edge. I want those to be nice and square where they attach to the floor, sit on the floor, or where they attach to the table. So that's why I used the mode where you have to select manually the parts of the curves you want to fillet. So now, because there are 4 legs, if you'll remember from the first project, anything that has multiples, it's always good practice to turn it into a symbol. So I'm going to modify create symbol. I'm going to call this table leg. Yes. And then in order to make the other 3 legs, I'm going to go to top view, and I could duplicate them and rotate them manually and move them into place. But instead of that, I'm going to use the duplicate array tool under edit. I want to create a circular array. I'm going to make 3 copies that are going to be 90 degrees apart. And I want to rotate the duplicates, which means that it will not only place them 90 degrees apart, it will also rotate them 90 degrees. And then I want that to happen around the next mouse click. So if I click OK, there we have it. I just want to show you what happens if you don't rotate the duplicates. So I'll put this over here, edit, duplicate array. I'm going to do exactly the same thing, except I'm not going to rotate the duplicates. I'm going to say the center would be right here. And so you see what it does. It puts them in the same place, but it didn't rotate them. So these 2 are incorrect. Okay, so then if we go back to isometric, it's looking like we've got a pretty good model going on there. The next step is we will apply the wood texture.